Okay, so while we're alive in this world, we have to establish a few facts. That there are physical objects, and so the third dimensional world exists. So, if we look at it like this, we can say, let me zoom out if that's possible. No, it's not. So, people equal third dimension, right? Our belief of God and heaven, however you want to define that, I'm not using any other term besides God and heaven, good place and higher power, equals fourth dimension, right? And that's key, specifically on the key aspect of a heaven being somewhere. And the omnipotence and vastness of the universe equals the fifth dimension. Okay, and I'm going to explain these a little bit more. So, the first dimension and second dimension are not linear. They don't stand up off things or on paper. So, let's look at it this way. If you're swimming in a pool, your body would be the third dimension. The water is the fourth dimension. The pool, concrete, cement enclosure itself is the fifth dimension. Okay? Why does this matter? Here's why. If you take sunlight, let me get this to focus. I don't know if the equation's correct. It's my best try. Right now I'm kind of tired. Sunlight is absorbed by photovoltaic cells to make electricity. So X amount of sunlight equals Y amount of electricity. If you take an electrical cable and you weigh it on a scale without power put to it, it will weigh X amount. If you add electricity, it weighs more. Thereby meaning that X amount of electricity has X amount of weight. So, if we take the weight of electricity divided by the amount of sunlight, we find out that light has a weight. So, if light has a weight, that means since energy can't be created or destroyed, it's always here, similar to the pool concept. We see light as a different thing, and the definition of it is really terrible, and that's one of the biggest hassles we have in life, and it's hard to understand that until you really get this concept. But essentially, the water, you are third dimension physical, right? The fourth dimension, I'm going to add physical plus human visibility. The fourth dimension would essentially be what we perceive as light. It shouldn't be called light, it should be called aura. What we define as light should be instead called luminance. The fifth dimension, the pool cement housing, would then be the universe. Okay? And so as we die in this life, we live here, we die, we don't cease to exist. Because we can't say that we're our bodies, because I'm not my hands. I'm something more than that. I'm defining my hands. You cannot be what you define. So I have a body. Ergo, I cannot be the body. I must be the consciousness. However, I have a consciousness. Ergo, I'm not the consciousness. It seems to sound similar to like a TV antenna. We are just receptors for a signal coming from a higher dimension. So when we die and our body releases that final electrical impulse and it doesn't create heat around our body and our body goes cold, that energy had to go somewhere, and it's not being absorbed by the machinery to power it. What happens is we transfer our consciousness to a higher dimension. And so, in essence, we go from the third dimension into the fourth. Now, to give you an idea of what the fourth dimension would look like, because you can't see it, the third dimension are physical people walking around. The fourth dimension would be everything around it. To you, it's invisible, but it exists. Imagine if you jumped in the pool. There's water surrounding you. That's essentially what's happening right now around you. You can see this effect by opening a car door with all the windows up except for one, and shutting the door. It will push the air in the atmosphere out. That's the same concept. That stuff that moves in and out, that pressure, has a physical manifestation. It exists physically. Even though we can't see it, it's still there. So, while we're alive in this earth, we have to define a few things. Why are we here? How do we know we're here? And what do we do next? So the biggest concept is you can't have anything without having reference points. So you cannot understand what life is until you understand what death is. And so when you die, it's not like you're dying. You're just getting to view life from a different perspective now. You get to view it as a whole collective instead of individuals. And so instead of us seeing that we're all unique and individual, we start to realize that we're the same. We start to realize that humanity is one organism, essentially. We are one facet to the gemstone collection of the earth. We provide certain functions and procedures, and we all do it together the same. Our consciousness, yes, segregated out while we're perceiving ourselves to be alive, or whatever you want to call that first place we come from. But there is another place. So a way to see this is that while a child is in a womb, what they hear is something along the lines of and that's about it. You can test this out by going and getting underwater in a pool and having someone stand outside and talk to you. So what this means is because there's no intelligible information being transferred there, the child is an on-off machine. And so for, a baby in the mother's belly, they hear noise and they don't know what to make of it because the sound doesn't transfer right. So they're just simply on-off machines. They make a noise, they know there's something happening, they don't know what it is, and they don't know how to define it because they have no language. When they're in that womb, since they can't hear anything, right, there's a fine line between alive and life, right? That baby is alive, right? But it is not life, not yet. It is blank, a blank slate, able to be written on, right? As soon as you're born, you see colors, you see things, you hear words, you're being programmed. You're being taught all the things around you. Now, take this into account. Humanity's pretty dumb. So, if you come out blank and you're taught by humans, you're not going to get any smarter than the people who taught you. Except for if you learn something intrinsically from your own experience. Now, what that means is this area of undefining exists. You can't say, who was I before I was born, because you didn't learn words until after you were born. Okay, so it's like you didn't know how to say, hi, my name is David, or hi, my name is Paige, until after someone taught you how to speak. But you existed before you knew how to speak, okay? Your consciousness exists before you know anything. Your consciousness exists while you're in your mother's womb, and you don't know anything other than nothing, because you forget all of that stuff, and you learn from that point forth. We're like a blank Furby, I guess. But because that place exists where our consciousness can be without having memory, and without having programming and things manipulating us into believing things, that means that you have to be able to go back to that place. So when you're upset that someone has died, imagine and remember this. The fourth dimension, your environment around you, if that's where you go when you die, you couldn't physically see someone. You would have to physically feel it. And the way to tell that is by cold, is by excitedness, is by something unexplainable happening. For example, maybe you trip in a funny way over your shoestrings. That's just impossible. Maybe you're walking on the road and all of a sudden your shoe falls off and rolls away, but it's not round. And so you're like, whoa, that's crazy. All of these things, they're deja vu experiences, they're anomalies, paranormal events. They're things that you can't normally explain that have to have a reasoning. Those things, I believe at least, are being manipulated by that fourth dimension. So if this is confusing to you, I'm sorry. I'm still working on how to define this concept as I get this information. But it's the very easy and rudimentary way of explaining that when you die, you don't just cease to exist. Your family surrounds you. They are what keeps you here. They are what holds you here. They are what allows you to exist here. Because without that atmosphere pressing against you, keeping you attached and close to the earth, you just float off into space and die. So just remember that everything around you is everything you love.